0536. Crypts of his speeches survive. In one addressed to aircraft manufacturers in 1943, he said, in essence, that the British had succeeded in building a bomber that any piano factory in their country could produce, while the Germans, with all their industrial might, could not match it. He called it a scandal. He called it a humiliation. He demanded answers. The answers were not forthcoming because there were no answers. The Mosquito was not a superior aircraft because the Germans were stupid. The Mosquito was a superior aircraft because the British had made a different bet about what materials and methods could win an air war, and the bet had paid off. Consider the psychology of a German night fighter pilot in 1943. He sits in his cockpit at a Dutch airfield waiting for the scramble. The radio crackles. A contact is reported over the coast. He starts engines, taxis out, takes off, climbs to his assigned altitude, and begins his patrol pattern. The ground controller vectors him. The contact is intermittent. The contact is fast. The contact is low. The contact on the third pass of the radar is gone entirely, swallowed by the ground clutter or the sea return, and the German pilot is left flying in circles in the dark, knowing that somewhere below him a wooden aeroplane is releasing bombs on a building he is supposed to be defending, and he will not catch it, and he will not even see it. That experience, repeated night after night across the whole of occupied Europe, did something to the morale of the German air defense. It convinced them that the war was being fought on terms they could not match. The Mosquito's real weapon was not its 4,000 pounds of bombs. Its real weapon was the conviction it planted in the mind of every German officer who tried and failed to intercept it. We built this out of wood, in our enemy's living rooms, and you cannot stop it. That was the kill that mattered, not the building that fell. The certainty in the mind of the defender that he was outclassed by a piece of furniture. The RAF cultivated this reputation deliberately. They flew Mosquito raids on Berlin on Hitler's birthday in 1943, hitting a radio station broadcasting his speech and knocking him off the air. They flew Mosquito raids on Gestapo headquarters in occupied capitals, demonstrating that no building, no matter how central or well-defended, was safe. They flew photo reconnaissance Mosquitoes over every German city in daylight, returning with images that became targeting data for the next night's raid. Every one of these missions was theater as much as it was war. The bombs mattered, of course. The intelligence mattered, but the message mattered more. We can come for you anywhere, anytime, and you cannot keep us out. The Mosquito was the messenger. The beginning of the end for the Mosquito's dominance came from a direction nobody at de Havilland had been able to fully predict. Not better fighters, not improved radar, physics. In late 1944, the Messerschmitt Me 262 began reaching operational units in numbers. The jet engine, which had been a laboratory curiosity in 1939, was now a working weapon. The Me 262 cruised at speeds the Mosquito could only achieve in a power dive. It carried 4 heavy cannon. It climbed faster than any piston aircraft. And in the few engagements where Me 262 pilots caught Mosquitoes in clear air, the result was usually a Mosquito going down in flames. The Mosquito had been built on a specific bet. The bet was that speed, gained by light construction and aerodynamic cleanliness, would always be enough to escape interception. The jet broke that bet. A Mosquito running flat out at 415 miles an hour was no longer fast. It was slow. The Me 262 closed the distance like a shark closing on a fish that thought it was the fastest thing in the sea. But the Me 262 arrived too late. Germany was out of fuel, out of pilots, out of time. By the time the jet was reaching squadrons in numbers, the war was months from ending. The Mosquito continued to fly missions, continued to take losses, continued to do the work, and the jet age caught up to her too late to matter for the war in Europe. The real obsolescence came after the war. The Gloucester Meteor and the de Havilland Vampire entered RAF service in the late 1940s. Both were jets. Both made every piston-engine combat aircraft obsolete overnight. The Mosquito soldiered on in odd corners of the world, in photo reconnaissance roles where her range and endurance still mattered, in night fighter roles in countries that could not yet afford jets, in test programs and target tug units and training establishments. The last operational Mosquito sortie by the RAF was flown in 1955, over the jungles of Malaya. The last operational Mosquito anywhere flew with the Israeli Air Force into the 1960s. Then the wooden aeroplanes went to museums. The glue began to fail. The fuselages cracked. The dope flaked off the fabric. The wood that had carried men through the most dangerous skis on Earth began to rot in hangars, and the world moved on to aluminium and titanium and composites that did not remember being trees. Leonard Cheshire survived the war. He founded a chain of homes for disabled veterans and lived into his 70s, a quiet philanthropist who almost never spoke about what he had done in the Mosquito. Basil Embry survived the war and rose to Air Chief Marshal. Reginald Reynolds survived the war. Guy Gibson did not. Percy Pickard did not. Of the 8,000 Mosquitoes built, fewer than 30 survive in any form today. 2 or 3 of those are airworthy. The Mosquito did not disappear with the men who flew her. Far from it. The basic principles that made the airplane great, the use of unconventional materials, the prioritization of speed over armament, the modular design that allowed one airframe to fill many roles, the willingness to bet that a small, fast, clever aircraft could do the work of a larger, slower, more heavily armed one. All of those ideas continued to evolve. The Canberra bomber inherited the Mosquito's role. The Lockheed Mosquito, the SR-71 Blackbird, was not named after her, but the design philosophy ran in a straight line. The modern stealth bomber is, in some ways, a Mosquito with better materials and a less photogenic shape. What is remarkable about the Mosquito is not just what she did during the war. It is what she tells us about how the air war actually worked. Forget the romantic image of massive bomber formations with thousands of guns and tens of thousands of crew. The reality was smaller, faster, and far more clever. The decisive missions were not always the ones with the biggest aircraft. Sometimes they were the ones with the smallest. The Mosquito War was not a war of brute force. It was a war of speed, accuracy, information, and surprise. The men who flew her succeeded because they understood their environment better than the enemy understood his. They knew the weather. They knew the radar coverage. They knew which valleys to fly down and which ridges to use as cover. They knew the difference between a route a bomber could take and a route a Mosquito could take, and they exploited that difference for 4 years. In many ways, the Mosquito represents one of the most successful matchings of design philosophy to operational requirement in the history of military aviation. The aircraft perfectly fit the missions. The men perfectly fit the aircraft. And the result was a 4-year period in which a few hundred wooden aeroplanes, built by furniture makers, did work that no other aircraft in the war could do. There is something almost elegant about it. The Germans poured billions into Messerschmitts and Junkers and Heinkels, building aircraft factories the size of small cities, refining metallurgy and pressing techniques to the limits of 1940s industry. And the British countered with cabinet makers and piano builders, gluing plywood together in workshops that had been making bedroom suites a year earlier, and the British aeroplane flew faster, hit harder, and lost fewer men. The Mosquito made the strategic air war winnable in places the heavies could not reach. You did not need a 1,000-bomber raid to destroy a Gestapo records office. You did not need a fleet of Lancasters to photograph a V-weapon facility. You did not need a daylight escort of 300 Mustangs to mark a target for the night force. You needed 2 men in a wooden aeroplane and a navigator with a stopwatch. And maybe that is the real legacy of the Mosquito. Not the mission she flew or the photographs she brought home, but the idea she represented. That the right answer to a problem is not always the biggest answer. That speed and cunning can do work that mass and firepower cannot. That a piece of furniture, built by craftsmen who never expected to make weapons, can change the outcome of a war. The next time you see an image of an Allied bomber from the Second World War, chances are you are looking at a 4-engine heavy at high altitude, bomb doors open over a German city. That makes for a great photograph, but it is only half the story. The other half was lower, faster, smaller, and made of wood. She did not announce herself with the drone of 4 engines and the glitter of 100 machine guns. She appeared out of the haze at 50 feet, dropped her bombs through a specific window, and was gone before the air raid sirens finished their first wail. She was the Mosquito, and she was the most versatile combat aircraft of the Second World War. If you want to see how the Lancaster crews of No. 617 Squadron carried Barnes-Wallis's bouncing bomb to the dams of the Ruhr Valley, that video is on screen now. Subscribe for more stories from the air war.